So let's talk about Crowdstrike and the debacle basically that's actually just happened and its impact basically on the future, and why the Crowdstrike debacle that just happened is actually nothing compared to what we might see in the future with agentic artificial intelligence. Now, when we have a look at Crowdstrike, they essentially issued a faulty firmware update that caused a null exception in Windows machines. Now, when you have a look across the wider internet, the estimates basically actually say that over 1 billion Windows machines were actually affected. That's what you'll find on YouTube. However, according to Microsoft, bearing in mind a lot of these machines are actually connected to Microsoft's Azure platform, say about 8.5 million computers were actually affected. So there's, on the one hand, there's a huge disparity between basically what's now being published basically on YouTube and the social media channels and everything else about the scale of the impact and Microsoft's official numbers. However, that aside, a lot of these Windows machines were running relatively critical services for airlines, airports, healthcare systems and providers, and so on and so forth. So even if the number is actually as low as 8.5 million machines, it's essentially a global crisis of global proportions that have hit the vast majority of countries, and will no doubt get a lot of them to really reconsider basically their reliance on individual, relatively centralized platform companies, whether that's cloud, whether that is actually cybersecurity, basically whether it's CRM, it doesn't really matter what it is. But as we increasingly see a platform-based economy emerging, consider this. So Crowdstrike issued one faulty firmware update, which my artificial intelligence has actually scanned, and within the space of 5 seconds said, this is the problem. This is what you can do about it. So on the one hand, we really have to question why the firmware update wasn't pushed, for example, through an artificial intelligence that identified null pointers. Secondly, though, when we have a look at the future and when it's related to agentic artificial intelligence, things get a lot more wiggy, and the consequences of a single failure in the system, which I'll explain in a minute, become many, many times greater. Now, for those of you that don't know, when we have a look at OpenAI's artificial intelligences, they are large language models. Ostensibly, when you talk to an OpenAI AI, you are talking to a single model, albeit based on something called the Master of Experts model, which I won't go into, but as far as you're concerned, you're talking to one AI. Now, as we start having a look at a future where we see agentic artificial intelligence, that model transforms itself into this. So, say for example, you query an artificial intelligence, you want it to do something, generate some research. Today, you're asking a single AI, I want to research this, go and explore stuff, give me information. That's fine. Now, in an agentic artificial intelligence world, that single AI that you talk to then essentially goes to a huge gig economy of artificial intelligences, lots of miniature artificial intelligence software programs and so on and so forth that have different levels of smarts and autonomy, etc., and says to them all, my boss wants me to research this particular topic, go off, go and do your own research, bring it all back to me as the master AI, and I will present that back to the boss. Now, this creates something called an agentic workflow. So, agentic workflows, on the one hand, can be comprised of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, even hundreds of millions of artificial intelligences or agents, all cooperating with one another, shall we say, for the greater good. Now consider the Crowdstrike problem that we saw. What happens if one of those agentic AI platforms or programs has a bug? On the one hand, it might not take down the world. It might just skew decision making. It might skew some outputs, whatever those outputs are, which we might not even notice until it's too late. Or alternatively, let's take an example. If we have an agentic artificial intelligence that is solely responsible for identity authentication and management, and it has a bug, bearing in mind that some of these agentic AIs, as well as the larger master and foundational artificial intelligence models, are already able to optimize their own code, evolve themselves, and then replicate themselves. Let's not go down that wormhole. Not yet, anyway. What would happen if that single IM agentic AI was faulty or crashed the system? As the world increasingly embeds not just artificial intelligence into its digital fabric, but intelligence, which is a key word, as AIs get smarter and more autonomous, into its digital fabric, what happens to global resilience then? Answers on a postcard, let me know. I kind of already know. But I suppose a more interesting question to ask would be, how do we prevent that kind of catastrophe in the future? So thank you for listening. My name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute. If you like this, follow, subscribe, do all the kind of things basically that the cool teens tell you to do. And I will see you again on the next one. Bye-bye.